Should you invest or should you pay off your mortgage early is a really common question we get asked at Medics Money. And it's also something where me and Ed do something different. And Ed is not only a doctor, but a chartered accountant, chartered tax advisor, and has a diploma in financial advice. So the fact that I'm doing something different from him is slightly concerning. So we thought we'd record an episode together outlining our respective strategies. And then when the rest of the team found out that we were recording, Andy Powell, chartered accountant, expert medical specialist accountant, decided to come along because he had some thoughts to throw in the pot as well. And then Dr. Cyra Asher, doctor and chartered accountant, also came along. So this podcast is going to be mayhem. Okay, I'm intimidated because I am the only unqualified one here. You guys are... We've got an amazing team at Medics Money, like just used to be me and Ed. Now we've got an amazing team. So I'm going to kick us off with my basic Simpleton theory, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, so the way I think about whether to pay off a debt is the interest rate on the debt higher than what you could do with that money instead? So let me give you an example. Let's imagine let's just use my own example. When I graduated in 2008, yeah, I know, I don't look that old. I had loads of debt and I had a credit card debt that was at a 19% interest rate. Okay. Am I going to be able to get an investment return more than 19% on that money? Extremely unlikely, in my opinion. And therefore, that's why the general wisdom is if it's a really high interest rate, like 19%, it'd be much better to pay off that debt first. And then once you've paid off that high interest rate of 19%, you see how the rest of the debts are. Okay. So that's how I kind of think about it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, for many, many years, you could get a mortgage at like 1.5%. Okay. What return on your money can you expect? Well, historically, if you invest in a broadly diversified, low-cost, passive stock portfolio, you can expect a return, historically speaking, not advice, of about 6% after inflation. So it's like, if I've got £1,000, do I pay down my debt that's at 1.5%, or do I put that money in the stock market and get 6%? But then you get into the kind of realm of the 6% in the stock market is not guaranteed. It's based on historical data versus the guaranteed return of paying down debt. And now we're in a situation where most people's mortgages are probably hovering around sort of 4 to 6% range. And so now the decision is a whole lot more difficult. And then, so I'm in camp invest, not overpay mortgage. Ed, do you want to go first? I mean, there's people chomping at the bit here. Tell me why I'm wrong and what I should do differently.
Yeah, okay. So I think the first thing to say is there's no kind of actual wrong or right answer for a lot of this, because in most situations it's a personal decision to be made. And for example, my situation is very much born from a very personal circumstance of my own. Okay, because for me, I used to be an accountant. Well, I'm an accountant and a chartered tax advisor. I came into medicine quite late in the day, and I only really bought my first ever house, or I only bought my first house in 2018. So my house right now is the only house I've ever bought. Okay, and I bought that just before I turned 38. Okay, and I was becoming increasingly worried at that time about what was in the press at the time, something called the rise of the silver renters. Basically, people who had left it so late to get a mortgage. They were no longer deemed by the mortgage companies to have enough working life in them to pay off their mortgages. And having spent a lot, pretty much all of my savings on putting myself through medical school, I hadn't even thought about buying a house, but I saw those headlines and thought I need to try and get onto the ladder. So I managed to scrape a deposit together through multiple means, including help from the bank of mum and dad, the government's Help to Buy scheme, and so on. But still, the only way that I could get an affordable mortgage at the time was taking out a mortgage term of 32 years, which would have taken me to the age of 70. I don't really want to work until I'm 70 years old. I'm sure nobody listening to this or watching this, and none of you guys want to work to the age of 70. And in June 2022, I basically began to overpay my mortgage. That's when I made that decision. And the main reason is totally, really, really psychological, because I am aware that, but based on my mortgage rate and based on investment returns currently, which of course, as you say, can go down, I can make or get more money by investing than overpaying the mortgage. But every month I get a mortgage overpayment letter from my mortgage lender. It tells me how long I've got my mortgage term. By overpaying like I'm doing, I'm bringing that term down by, I think the calculation was by 6 or 7 years for the amount that I'm paying. So it's taken me from 32 years, which is, it strikes fear into me, and working to the age of 70 and all these things, going down by about 6, 7 years. just by doing that. So for me, fully appreciate that I could do what you're doing, Tommy. I could instead try and save that money. I could invest that money. When I remortgage, I could then, overpay when I do that. But actually, watching that mortgage length term reduce on these letters I get every month is really important to me. It's nice to see that kind of goal I've got, reducing the term, and physically see it on a letter every month. Okay, so I get, I don't think you're wrong. I think there's financial sense in what you're saying, but sometimes it's the heart, not just the head, with these decisions. And I think everyone, just like me, will have their own personal circumstances.
Definitely. In a sense, if you're having this debate, you're already winning, because it means that you've got spare money every month and you're in a really fortunate position, and you just got to choose the most effective way to deploy that capital. Like, if you're having this debate, you're already winning. Who wants to go next? Cyra?
Yeah, so I'm in camp not overpay. So you and I are finally on the same page, I think, Tommy. So my reasons, again, I think I really agree with Ed, but basically it's very personal, and there's no one size fits all. So I think the purpose of this, and all of us wanting to have our 2 cents, was to basically show and demonstrate that everybody listening to this, you're going to resonate with some things and not with others. So, just because you read something in the news about you should do X, Y, and Z doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. It's very personal. And my reasoning for being in camp not overpaying is because I came in also slightly later than average. So I joined the property ladder at the age of 32. But now that's becoming an average. That's actually quite normal. People don't actually jump on the property ladder until 31, I think, is the average age in the UK now. We have a 35-year mortgage, which is quite long. And I did have the same worries as Ed about working well into my XYZs before paying it off. But then I also thought about how over time the prices of houses have been rising. And actually, I don't personally feel that the house prices can rise the way they have been. And to me, I feel that having this asset that I'm going to overpay for, which is probably not going to appreciate as much as it would have historically appreciated, means that I really should be thinking of alternative ways to have some sort of nest egg, some sort of retirement plan that would enable me to live the lifestyle that I want to live when I'm retiring. So my idea was to basically use that money to have another deposit to be able to buy an investment property and then rent that out and use that as not only a regular income, but then eventually as an asset that I can sell off if need be, if there was ever the need. Or I could use it to pay off my current mortgage, which is still, despite being between 4 and 6%, probably the lowest percentage debt I have at the moment. So in my mind, it was that kind of decision making that has led me to be in this camp. So at the moment, I'm investing that money, and my intention is to grow it enough to get a good loan to value for an investment property.
Sound logic. Welcome to Camp Invest. It's a beautiful place to be. I think you've touched on something which I'm probably going to get annihilated in the YouTube comments here. What you're saying is that you're not convinced that your residence, your home, is an investment that's going to appreciate in value over time. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. I read somewhere the other day that house prices today are the same as they were in 2004, okay, adjusted for inflation. And this is what people kind of sometimes misunderstand. They're like, oh, my granny bought a house for £50,000 in 1952. Now it's worth 450 grand. You're like, well done. It's just kept up with inflation, nothing more than that. So people underestimate that. So I don't really view my main primary residence as an investment, which is quite triggering for some people who think that their house is a great investment. An investment is something that pays you money every single month, like your stocks and shares ISA. Your rental property could be an investment, but your main residence, I mean, mine just costs me money all the time, mainly because I'm doing a bit of renovations, but that's my problem. But maybe your own home isn't this amazing investment that the British public have been brought up to believe.
Yeah, so I'm a bit like the pantomime villain here, because I feel like the older person on the podcast who's perhaps ridden the property boom in the best possible way. So I kind of agree with all the points being made. I do also agree fundamentally with the point Tommy's just made around the fact that I very much view my house that I live in as, yes, it's an investment. Yes, I want it to keep up with, inflation, etc. But I do not view it as an investment I'm going to be retiring off in retirement, because ultimately I'm going to have to live somewhere. You can only sort of take money out of your property if you downsize at retirement, and that's going to be I guess that's going to become trickier as we all get older, because as the population ages, there's going to be lots of people wanting to downsize, and those smaller houses will actually become more attractive than perhaps some bigger houses. So I've come at it from, my lucky viewpoint, probably compared with the story you've heard today, is I bought my first house in the 1990s at a time where house prices were sensible. I think the first proper house we bought together with my wife was something like 2 times our earnings at the time, and we were still on that career path upwards at that point in time, so we hadn't peaked in terms of earnings. So that house I bought now, valued, I looked. Well, in fact, my son usually sends me Rightmove things of where we used to live. Going, have you seen how much the prices are? Well, you shouldn't have sold that house. Well, I had to sell that house because we had to live somewhere else. But they've gone up by a ridiculous amount over that period. So I've been in a lucky position where actually I've had the capital growth. Equally, I've been in a lucky position where over that period of time we've had some fairly dramatic economic situations and interest rates plummeted. So to me, when we bought our first house, interest rates were 7-8%, and they came down. They sort of settled about 5%, really where they are now. And then we had the big crash in 2008, and it stuck at a very, very historic low, which I think everyone, certainly in your age group, have probably bought in that period and therefore used to low interest rates, and now it's gone back to perhaps normality. So what I was able to do, and this may well return if interest rates start to drop, we got used to paying our regular monthly payment in terms of our mortgage, and when interest rates dropped, I just kept it the same. So actually it didn't cost me any more. And by that, automatically I switched into Ed's overpaying situation. And with interest rates being so low, we actually reduced the mortgage quite quickly, which is a lucky position to be in. I think from my perspective, I've always taken that view. Now, the other side to it is also, when you look at your monthly outgoings, to me, the mortgage was always the biggest outgoing you had. Probably renting is exactly the same if you're in renting. It's always that single one-off thing. And to be free of not having to pay that is, in terms of my sort of, planning towards how I wanted to, what I wanted to do in my 50s, into my 60s, into my 70s, which, just to avoid any confusion, I haven't made those age 60s and 70s yet. I may be in my 50s, but I wanted to get to the point in my 50s where I had total flexibility of what I wanted to do, not quitting work, but actually being able to do what I wanted to do, things like this. And to do that, getting rid of one of my biggest outgoings, it was crucial, because I don't have to earn as much per month to live off now, which is great. For me, the paying down the mortgage bit was part of that overall plan. Now, I've also done investments alongside of that, because I'm not in the NHS pension or anything like that. So I've had to do private pensions. I've done ISAs as well. But paying off the mortgage was part and parcel of the overall planning that I did. And it's worked out quite well for me. But I appreciate I'm probably in a luckier position than a lot of people are these days.
Yeah, I mean, this is all far too reasonable and measured, but you made some really awesome points there. Like, you bought your first house for 2 times your salary. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't looked recently, but I think it's up at like 6 or 7 times now. So as a percentage of our pay, houses are considerably more expensive. Now, you could say that house price growth has overtaken wage growth, or wage growth hasn't kept up with house prices, kind of same argument. I guess for me, right, the reason why I get nervous about this is, A, I'm doing something different to Ed and Andy, which is concerning, but B, it's about your psychology of money. So when I graduated, I had horrendous debts, student loan, owed my mum money, credit card, bank loans, terrible times. And now I'm in a fortunate position where my only debt is my mortgage, and, I live a comfortable life. But in the back of my mind, I'm just like, like what Andy just said, if I could get rid of that debt, my largest monthly outgoing, how would that feel? That would feel amazing. But then balanced against that is what I actually did. So I bought a house in 2000, a flat actually, in 2010. So let's just say from 2010 to 2014, my average kind of mortgage rate was around 2.2%. Okay. So historically very low. And during that time, instead of in 2010, I could have started overpaying, but instead I invested in a stocks and shares ISA, and that's been doing about 7%. Okay, after inflation. And after inflation is the kind of only measure that I really use, because that's like real money. So already in those 14 years, my experience is that investing has been way better than overpaying. But somehow, even though I've got this investing money in the bank, so to speak, it's just this psychological niggle that's saying to me, Tommy, pay down the debt. Debt nearly destroyed you when you left medical school. You should pay down this debt. And then I hear Ed and Andy saying, yeah, we're overpaying. And I'm like, oh, Cyra, are we okay? Are we crazy? Like, what do you think?
I am crazy, but for different reasons, so don't worry about that too much. No, I think, like you say, there's actually recognizing and identifying that you've got a psychological trigger with debt, and that's what drives your decision making is actually really, really valuable. And sitting back and just recognizing it is such a big achievement in itself, I think. And then on top of that, actually being able to rationalize, yes, I have these feelings about debt. However, am I making the right decision for me, removing that emotion? And I personally feel that you are, because like you said, you do really value investing. For you, it's giving you the return that you need. You're still able to maintain the assets that you have. And you're at a stage in your life where you can, I get where Andy's coming from, where he wants to be able to do the things now that he wasn't able to do when he was raising a family and necessarily in the peak of his career. And I think that you're currently at the peak or nearly, around that time, and there's no need to actually change the way you're doing things now to try and live the kind of life you want to live in 20 years' time. Does that make sense? That actually you're doing the things you need to do to be able to live the kind of life you want to live in 20 years' time. And sometimes I think that is different from what we will be doing in the future.
And to clarify as well what Ed and Andy said, like Andy said, he's not 100% in team overpay. He's also got investments on the side. So, and Ed the same. So in a way that they're kind of hedging their bets. And I guess that's where my insecurity about my decision comes in, because they are in team overpay, but they're also hedging their bets a bit as well. And actually, I hedged my bets recently because I needed to do some renovations on my house. So I could have borrowed more money on my mortgage. And back then, I think I could have borrowed it at like 1.5% or something. And I just thought, oh, do you know what? I'm not going to borrow it. I'm just going to use other money, which I could have invested, and use that instead. So, and that was a psychologically driven decision. And I think financially it was the wrong call, like definitely, but I feel 100% comfortable with it. So yeah, the psychology is the main kind of thing here. Okay, let me tell you about, because I think about this a lot. So this is like some kind of ways that I thought that I could do this, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, so the first one is I might use a pensions lump sum to pay off my mortgage when I retire, right? Here's my thinking. That money that's in my pension is some of the most tax efficient money you can get. You get tax relief on the way in, and you can get a tax-free lump sum. So I might use that to clear my mortgage when I retire as a kind of, done. Criticize that strategy and tell me why it's good or not a good idea.
You could get.
I don't think I can criticize that strategy, because actually, I think that what I would criticize is you're splitting off the mortgage and paying off the mortgage with your other investment strategies. Well, actually, it's all one big thing. It's all what you want to do with your lifestyle. If you go back to sort of basic financial planning, basic financial planning is actually fundamentally, first and foremost, you have to set your goals and then you work backwards from that. So if your goal is to, let's say 60 is your retirement date, but you're at 60, I want to be totally debt free, but I have no use for that tax-free lump sum that I know is coming, or I hope is coming, and won't get changed by the government between now and when I get there, or to have some tax rules changed around it. But just assuming it doesn't. But if you say, look, I'm getting a tax-free lump sum of £100,000, I haven't got any other plans for that, then actually using that to repay a mortgage at that point in time is a sensible financial plan. However, if you do say, well, actually, of that 100,000, I know I'm still supporting my kids. They may now be in their late 20s, but everyone needs help on the property ladder and stuff like that. You may earmark it for that, in which case that lump sum disappears. Something may happen between now and retirement that changes that path as well. So you've got to constantly re-review this. So your decision now not to repay the mortgage is fine, because that fits with your strategy now. In 5 years' time, it may be different. So if you review it every year, you can always, change tactic. So I wouldn't criticize what you're actually saying, because actually that suits your plan at the moment.
So, what we were talking about, where we were at like life stages, if I don't know whether you're on the same page in terms of this, but right now I have a certain size house which I need for my personal circumstances right now. But I don't want to be cleaning and dealing with this size house when I'm 70 and my hips have given up. So I already know in my head that I'm probably going to downsize much later in life. I'm not going to be living in a big house. So I don't really need to pay off this big house now. So in my head, I don't really feel I'm even going to have the size of the mortgage that I have now to worry about paying it off, because I'm going to be ideally living in just a nice flat that I can manage. And so that has also incorporated into my financial planning. Why pay or overpay for a size of a house that I will most likely, if not definitely, downsize by the time I retire anyway? And I'll actually be releasing equity from it, not worrying about paying it off.
But you could flip that on its head, and you could say, actually, by paying it off, it then gives you a bit more capital when you get to that point in time, gives you a bit more flexibility, or allows you to do that earlier than perhaps you planned. I don't know. Everyone's different, and that's I guess that's the beauty of having this. And I think your point, Cyra, about that life cycle is massively important, because clearly I'm at a different stage in my life cycle to where you are, and therefore I see things differently, because I've got more immediate plans, whereas you've got a longer term plan ahead. So that's why it just it just shows that actually, we can all have our opinions on this, but what is ultimately right is right for you where you are now.
Yeah, I think that's my take home for the day. This is like therapy for me. So Martin Lewis, consumer champion. I thought I'd have a look at what Martin Lewis recommends, and I don't want to get annihilated in the YouTube comments again, but I think he's got this wrong, right? Because on the Martin Lewis website, he phrases it as saving or pay off the mortgage, and he says that most people would be better off paying off the mortgage than saving, because your mortgage is like 5% and your savings return is 3%. So in that case, I agree with him. But actually, I've just told you that my investment return over the last 14 years is about 7%. And so it depends on your attitude to risk, because if your choice is between paying off the mortgage or putting this money in a 1% instant access easy savings account, right? It's a no-brainer, isn't it? The mortgage has got to go. And that goes back to my point, which is that if I'm thinking about paying off a debt, I'm like, okay, what's the expected return from the investment, and what's the interest rate of the debt? And I guess for now, when interest rates, all the time the interest rates were 1%, easy, like my 7% absolutely annihilates it. Now, let's say I'm paying 6% on my mortgage and I'm getting 7% historically on the investments. Well, that's 6% on my mortgage. If I overpay that is a guaranteed return. Like if you overpay a debt with 6% interest rate, that's a guaranteed 6% return. Whereas if I'm getting 7% in the stock market, it's definitely not guaranteed. And so it's getting a bit tighter more recently.
So could I be really boring and do the accountant thing here and throw tax in as well?
That's why we invited you guys. I can't believe, I was the first one to mention tax, and what's going on? You guys have let me down.
Yeah, so bear in mind, the other way, being the really boring accountant looking at it is your mortgage is paid out of net of tax income. So you're not getting tax relief on the interest you pay on your mortgage. So if you are paying 6%, then you have to earn substantially more, pay tax on it first before paying it down. So actually you've got to make sure that investment return, you are comparing like with like here, that the investment return is net of tax investment return.
Okay, like the final curveball doesn't apply to me, but it might apply to some people. What would you do? Like, would you overpay your mortgage if you anticipated getting a large inheritance, right? And it's like, don't want to bring the tone down, but if you've got a massive inheritance waiting for you, how would that change your decision? I have no idea on the answer to this question, because I don't have this problem, but someone chime in with what they think, because I think this is a factor.
Yeah, I think if I go a big inheritance, I'd almost certainly pay off my mortgage. I just, just like Andy was saying, it's all about your priorities at that point in life. And for me, to get rid of my mortgage and not have those monthly outgoings is such an amazing thing. I'm pretty sure everyone would want to, doesn't want their mortgage full stop, but not everyone would do what I would do. But I certainly would actually pay off my mortgage straight away if I got a large inheritance or some other factor. Fully appreciate right now, everyone's circumstances are different, and I'm lucky. My mortgage rate, I fixed it at a decently low rate, so I've got another 2 years on that. I'm just lucky again. But yeah, I would definitely just want to get rid of the mortgage and get rid of those monthly outgoings, and then reevaluate my life. I think
I would. This is so boring, such an accountant answer. So I would buy a rental property with it, because for me at this stage it's about investing and creating that nest egg early to then be able to depend on that regardless of what government decisions do about my NHS pension that, by the way, has changed twice in a 7-year period. So, you know, we can't trust that. So for me, it's about having the security of a plan when I'm ready to retire.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only point I'd probably say is you should never plan on getting inheritances to pay off things, because for whatever reason, it may not come your way. It's always not, you know, I say it's always nice. It's not nice necessarily when you inherit because an event's happened that probably you don't like. But, you know, if you're in a position where you get an inheritance, I think that's the point you then make the choice. As Cyra said, you know, again, at her point in life, is do an investment rather than repay the mortgage. Ed said, actually, he would repay the mortgage. It goes back to all those points previously. It's down to sort of your personal view of where you want to be. But I wouldn't use an inheritance as a long-term plan because there's so much uncertainty around what you would actually get.
It's not going to be a factor for me, but to completely contradict myself, if I got an inheritance right now, I might consider doing an offset mortgage, because that's a kind of like a little hedge. I could do an offset mortgage for a couple of years, see what's going on. And for those that don't know, an offset mortgage, basically, let's imagine that you have a mortgage of £300,000. You have a offset account attached to that mortgage. Let's say you had £100,000 in your offset account. You would only pay the balance on £200,000. And if you had a mortgage of £300,000 and you had £200,000 in the offset bit, you'd only pay the mortgage balance on £100,000. So that's a kind of like a little hedge. And I looked at an offset mortgage last time around because as a self-employed person, I have money waiting to go to HMRC all the time. And the numbers didn't quite stack up, mainly because interest rates were so favorable. This time around, maybe an offset mortgage could be worthwhile. And if you have to keep a lot of cash aside for paying tax bills, then offset mortgage could be a thinking man's hedge. What do you think?
Yeah, quite like the idea of that. What's the interest rate on the account that you sit your money sitting in?
As far as I understand, say like your mortgage is 5%, you're effectively just not paying balance on however much you got in the cash. So the interest, to answer your question, the interest rate is whatever the mortgage interest rate is my understanding about it.
And also, I think the other factor is the tax, because if you've got money sat in a normal interest-only account, subject to the savings allowance you get, which is reducing quite substantially at the moment, you will pay tax on that interest. But actually, if you have it offset against the mortgage, the interest you saved on that mortgage by having it offset is tax-free. So you're not, again, comparing like with like in terms of your saving rate and your mortgage rate. You know, personally, from my viewpoint, I've always had offset mortgages. In fact, I've still got a small offset mortgage now, which I've just kept back because I've got it fully offset. But I've just then got access to that cash if I need to do it for whatever reason. You know, if I suddenly jump into Cyra's account and thinking, actually, you know, I want to go and get a buy-to-let property. I've got the deposit there waiting to go, but I'm not actually paying any interest on the mortgage. So that hedging side of it is quite important.
Yeah, it's turning into like an offset mortgage advertisement. It's not advice, but actually, I'm starting to think that it could make a lot of sense for all the reasons that Andy just mentioned. And it's a hedge, like you can keep your options open for the future if you need it. And as obviously interest rates on mortgages are quite high at the moment, it makes it more attractive. But do your own research, speak to a good broker like those on Medic's Money. All right. I think there's some clarity in there for everybody. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know what you're doing in the YouTube comments. Final thoughts from everybody. Like, what's your take homes?
You know, we've said it many times before, but the take home is really that, you know, everyone's circumstances are different. You know, there might be a perfect financial strategy in there, but don't forget there are some other psychological factors as well to think about. And yeah, I think everyone's different. Everyone's circumstances are different. And hopefully people will find that useful today.
Mine is everything's very personal and everyone's circumstances are so unique that there's no black and white way of saying which camp you should be in. So talk to someone who knows their stuff. Don't let emotions get in the way. And it's also the decision you make today doesn't have to be set in stone. So even if you change your mind tomorrow, in a couple of years' time, absolutely fine.
Yeah, mine would be take this as part of your overall sort of life goal strategy, you know, in terms of where you want to be. But as Cyra has quite rightly said, what applies today doesn't necessarily apply in 2-3 years' time. You can always chop and change. So you always have to go back and review that strategy as well.
What I've taken from this is that maybe I've been anchored on the numbers too much because I've told you my numbers, and the numbers clearly, for my situation, mean that investing was the right decision. But it's super interesting to hear Ed and Andy acknowledge that, yeah, the numbers do kind of add up like that, but there's other reasons why you might want to do that. So my take home is that I should think more about my psychology of money, and the numbers tell you one thing. What you actually do is a blend of the numbers, your past experiences, and your feelings about money and psychology. And I'm just going to reiterate that if you're having this kind of debate, you're already winning. Like, you've got spare cash every month and you're thinking, what can I do with it? Presumably you've paid off all your high interest rate debt like credit card, before having this conversation. So you're already winning. But I hope that this helped. And again, let us know what you're doing in the YouTube comments. And thanks so much for everyone's contributions today. That was really cool.
Really?
We should do more like random, because we have chats like this all the time amongst ourselves. I mean, we could just literally record one of our chats. We might need to get a bleep button, but other than that, I reckon it'd be quite cool. So let us know if you want more random, zero script chats about what we do with our own money.